Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to AVX Live. I'm Joe Gilderson, President of Corporate Audio Visual Services. And to be honest, it's been a while since our last episode. And with the new year, we have some new thoughts. This podcast has actually been going on for 5 years at this point. And so it's time for some changes. And so we've been looking at the different things we're going to make adjustments to. And I got to tell you, the first thing that I plan on doing is kind of opening the door to flexibility and not being so rigid on the 1 p.m. on Wednesday time slot. It's always been a lot easier for me to manage my own schedule with that, but it's also harder to get guests on. So we're going to make some changes. We'll see how that works out. Now, my platform has also changed. I think many of you know that I've used StreamYard literally right from go for a lot of reasons. When it came out, it was really suited towards this. And then it integrated with a platform that we were working on, which was called Hopin. And in the virtual time frame, that was like the top shelf on anything of a large scale. And we were actually one of the country's preferred providers. We were, there might have been like 10 or 15 of us in the country. There weren't that many. But Hopin got bought. There was lots of changes, lots of things going on the last few years. But StreamYard recently got purchased by a company called Bending Spoons. And they have much more of an AI plan right now. So there's a whole bunch of new features, things I haven't used, but we're going to try them out today and, see what happens, because this is really the only way we get to learn things is by having some fun in this kind of an environment. So we're going to get this thing going, But before we get started, let's see if I can remember all these things. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. And of course, drop us a comment. You're welcome to be a part of the show at any time, because who really wants to hear me anyways? Look, if you miss anything, go back, take a look at the other 125 episodes on our YouTube channel. That's really where everything lives. And there's a lot of really good resources at this point, because we've discussed a lot of different things over time. And afterwards, you can check out Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. If anything I say is of just a little bit of intelligence, Alexis is probably going to put it online, because that's the way this thing works now. But look, let's get right into what we're going to discuss today, which is the power of partnerships. Let me just click a few things and get a few things off of here, okay? Because they're all in different places now. But let's talk about partnerships. And I like to think that we have a unique perspective on venue relationships. We've been in the same market, which is New York City, Westchester County, Fairfield County, Rockland County, Northern New Jersey, for over 40 years. So we've worked in hundreds of local venues and then hundreds of national venues, because we also travel all across the country. And it's amazing how often you go back to the same places. So we've always put relationships in a long-term perspective as a cornerstone of who we are and our culture and our business. So I like to think that all these relationships, and with venues in particular, are a reason for our long-term success. We think every time we go to a new venue, we go, hey, look, let's do a great job, because we're probably going to come back, and we'd like to be invited back if at all possible. We've always recognized that we're in someone else's home. And, we try not to put our feet on the table, if you know what I mean. So venue relationships have always been very important to us. And we look at it as a partnership. So let's look at some of the reasons why there is a power in these partnerships. Okay, let's start with seamless collaboration. What does that mean? Well, each venue has a certain quality standard and a certain look and a certain feel. And if you understand the venue and their staff and the manager's perspectives, any supplier is at a real advantage. From the audiovisual side, I know that it's always helped us, and I'm sure it's helped many other people all around the country. I noticed that the communication is better. The coordination of the room setups ahead of time, as well as afterwards, are always better. Usually we work with the venue and we're having these discussions and say, okay, what do you have in that space beforehand? What do you have in that space afterwards? Why is that important? Your experience as a client is going to be a lot better if the two of us are working together. And so that's always one of our goals. So we have these discussions every single day. And most of the time, it's the venue, ourselves, and maybe a handful of other suppliers. They're the only ones that really know that and what's really going on behind the scenes. And that's how it should be. Not everybody needs to be back of house. We're working off the same floor plans. We're always trying to make sure we're cognizant of protecting their space. A lot of the places we go to are historic. They are mansions. They have very elaborate chandeliers, sconces, new carpets, flooring, tile. Like there's all these things you have to be aware of if you're going back repeatedly. We tell our team how exactly to tape things down on the floor. We have certain places where we use certain color tape. We do a certain screen setup in one place that is different than another. So we're trying to keep that look and feel of the space as well as it to be functional for our client. All in all, it really creates a better experience. And that's kind of what we're looking for from start to finish. Let's look at another piece. Better solutions for the space. Okay. For us, that means that we're going to know exactly what to recommend for each room and for each setup. So we may do it one way for one type of event, one way for another. Well, what does that mean? Well, we've already figured this out, right? And in most of the spaces that we work in consistently, which is, we have what we call like a lookbook, different pictures that we can show clients. Hey, this is what it looks like if you use projection screens. Here's an option if you use televisions. Here's another option if you want to use an LED wall. We can actually show you what it looks like because we've already done it. And we've done it in different ways that the room can be configured. And that's really important. So we're giving you the best options that are designed for that space, not just for any space, but for that space that you're going to. And I think that's really important. And look, we're not the only ones to do this. I'm kind of speaking for everyone that does this kind of work right now. But I think it's good for people to understand how important that power is in the partnerships. We're by having similar packages and similar types of equipment that we're going to use in each space, we're actually able to reduce the costs as well. Because there are certain things we're going to prepare them and pack them and put them on a truck and deliver them in a certain way. When I go to one space, I'm thinking of a friend of mine in White Plains. They don't have any place to store equipment. So we have to prepare our equipment in a way that it's going to fit and not have giant bulky cases all over the place, which is what you would bring into a large space, a convention center, a hotel, any place that's really large. Well, not all of our spaces are really large. Some of them are you're there for the view, you're there for the location, and they're very elegant. And you can't have big giant cases kind of lurking around everywhere. There's no place to put them. But we also have a sense of what's going to work in the full room. Is it going to be lengthwise? Is it going to be on a short wall, long wall? Like we know what's going to work in a half room. All of these things are advantages of being a partner with a venue. Let's go on. Experience and knowledge count. They still do. AI can't do everything for you yet. Before we start a relationship with an event space, we actually do a lot of pre-work. We're taking pictures. We're walking the space from where the truck is going to pull up to where the client is going to pull up. So we're getting a sense of what everybody is seeing. We're taking measurements. We're doing floor plans. We're mapping out pathways. Sometimes we're doing renderings of the room. So we know ahead of time what it's going to look like. When it's show time and it's show day, we already know the load in and the load out process. Now imagine you've gone to the same place 100 times. It makes for a much easier transition. So we're in the room faster. We're setting up quicker. We already know what's going to go in what room and what place ahead of time. We've already marked it out. So, in our case, we color code things before they even get there. So if one thing is going in a cocktail room and another thing's going in the main ballroom and something else is going in a breakout room, it's already labeled and getting routed to that space. Sometimes we load them in different paths. To one goes in one door, one goes in another door. All that work is done ahead of time. When you know the venue and the event space, everything is much easier. We know the ceiling heights, we know the power limitations, we know if there's union staff, non-union staff, we know how the Wi-Fi works, we probably have a code. All of these things are real advantages and helps our clients. So we're in a position of knowledge, and then we can help. And all of this goes into how we're going to spec the layout and the design right from go. So that's where, 40 years of experience is pretty hard to replicate, and it's an advantage. Let's keep this thing moving. No surprises. Whoa. I mean, does anybody really like surprises? I don't see any comments on this one, but does anybody really like surprises on event day? Yeah, we don't either. Okay. And I know the venues don't. None of them like surprises. That's why we do all that work ahead of time, right? It's why we have event producers who are on site leading the team. Look, we spent all that time on pre-event calls. We did the site visit with the clients, with the venue. We're all talking together. We're doing Zoom calls and prepping. We're looking at shared floor plans. We're looking at agendas. We're looking at BEOs, the banquet event orders. We've already seen these things ahead of time, mostly. And all of that is so that we don't have any big surprises. So the big things are out of the way, then we can deal with all the small things that are going to come up, because there's a lot of things that come up. But we already know what to expect. And look, from your perspective, you're dealing with professionals. And when we have that collaboration with the venue, everybody's on the same page. And there's a predictable performance that we already kind of sense and know how it's going to go, because we've already done this dance together, right? We've worked together on dozens or hundreds of events, and it makes it much smoother all around. I do have one interesting element I added here. Okay. And that is that benefits without contract issues. Let me explain what that means. So the reason I thought I'd address this is because many of our clients, they go to hotels, and a lot of, especially the 4 and 5-star hotels, New York City, Manhattan, all the major cities, we'll say Chicago, Vegas, San Francisco, they typically have an in-house provider. Now, an in-house provider is a third-party company. In our case, we're talking about AV, so it's a third-party audiovisual provider. They usually have staff on site at the biggest hotels. They usually keep equipment in the building, and they have a contract with the hotel. Now, for that contract, they pay the hotel 50% of the AV invoice, plus. Like it's a very lucrative deal for the hotel, and maybe for the AV provider. Now, that model is something that we've really never embraced and have never been fans of. I just don't like the idea of reporting to two people in general. And in that relationship, when you're the in-house provider, your main client is the hotel. It's not the client who's actually paying you the bill. And so I've never felt comfortable with that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So all of our relationships, for the most part, are really as a preferred vendor or a preferred partner. Now, there's a couple of big differences there, right? Look, the first one is that in our model, the client is always first. It's really simple. I like to look at it as like we're the hired gun. We represent this person. The client always has the ability to use someone else. If they trust someone else, they always have that ability. They're not forced to use us. There happens to be a place pretty close by where they don't even tell the client, actually. And then they hit them with a $10,000 fee for the full room. And if they use half the room, it's a $5,000 fee, which is the great mystery that nobody knows until, it's too late kind of thing. And they're trying to force you to do something. And that's kind of an unfortunate relationship just from go. So that's why we never liked the design. Um, and a major one for us is that there are no huge markup costs that are passed along to the client. I mean, if you just think that it's 50% higher, who's paying that? Well, the client's paying that, right? And again, not ideal. Not a competitive situation. It's kind of like you're going to have to do this, and that eats up budget that should be going to something else. And again, really important to us is that our results always matter. Like, part of who we are is we're very much results based. We're very much success based. So we always have to be good. The reason I say that is because there's really no penalty if someone kind of doesn't do a good job in some of these places. I mean, and most of the time they do. They do good work. But there are times and there are places where, you know, they don't seem to care. And if you've gone through it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the guy sleeping in the corner. That's the shadow labor. That's a great mystery by itself. But I'm referring to, when they just don't seem to, like, it doesn't matter. There's another show coming in tomorrow. That's a tough perspective when you're in the service business. So we don't think like that. And that's the reason I bring it up. I think it's important to understand the difference between a preferred relationship and a contracted relationship. And that, to me, is really the power in partnerships. I didn't want to get too in depth on this. I just wanted to kind of give everybody some quick points to think about, because we're in the beginning of the planning season right now. And I mean, everybody is coming in. So if you're planning, you should get your event on the calendar now, whether that's for us or anybody else. I know we're experiencing a very busy, next 6 months, and I'm super happy about that. I like to think it's because of the power and partnerships and all the relationships we have with people. I could be wrong though, but that's a story for another day. Listen, let's try to get this thing wrapped up. Let me just remind everybody that you can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. While you're there, hit the like and subscribe button. And look, if you miss anything, go back, take a look at YouTube. You can see 126 videos now there in the Corporate AV channel. And I really appreciate everybody's time today. It is pretty much about that time. So I'm out. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.